So thank you for taking the time, because there is so much to unpack when it comes to batteries, when it comes to EV and batteries. And there's a whole world of myth and legend attached to batteries. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time to give us some of the facts, actually, and where we're at with batteries and what we know about them and how they're actually playing out in the real world. Firstly, then, I know there are lots of different types of batteries. We all do, from our remote control to our mobile phone to our EVs. Can you run me through the science of how they actually work?
So the champion of the electric vehicle traction battery, the one that actually powers your car rather than the windscreen wipers in it, is the lithium-ion cell. And that's actually quite a broad church of chemistries. But fundamentally, what they all have in common is the anode, which is the negative electrode, will have lots of lithium ions in it at the beginning when it's fully charged. And then as you're discharging it, those lithium ions move across out of the anode, across the cell through the separator, which is just a kind of polymer film that allows the ions through it, but doesn't allow electrons through it. They have to take the external circuit, in other words, leave the cell, leave the battery pack, power the electric motor, and go in the other side where they recombine with the lithium ions to become lithium atoms within some sort of heavy metal oxide structure. However, recently we've seen quite a lot of electric vehicles launched that have lithium iron phosphate cathodes, which are a very different structure. There's no nickel, there's no cobalt, they're safer, they're longer lasting, and they're much cheaper too. So those are the mainstays of electric vehicle batteries at the moment, although of course there's lots of exciting chemistries on the horizon. But in terms of a car that you would buy today, it's likely going to be NMC or LFP lithium ion cells in it.
We all did learn how batteries work at school. It's the science of that is playing out just the same way. It's just that we're using a different recipe of chemicals. And that recipe of chemicals that we're using is what's critical to, I'm guessing, performance.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Performance, safety, lifespan, the works. So there were some earlier batteries that didn't last as much as we'd like them to, but we have learned since then how to tweak chemistries so that they do last longer, how to tweak chemistries and battery design so that they last longer as well. So we've added in liquid-based thermal management systems to wick away heat before it can cause any long-term degradation issues. And that's why pretty much any other electric car from the early 2010s is still running around in its original battery with minimum loss of range.
And that's the key. We're outlasting expectations. Isn't it amazing to be able to say, for once in a day, things are better than we thought? Is that fair?
It is true, yeah, because when we were testing lithium ion cells in the lab in the kind of earlier days and coming up with predictions of, oh, they'll maybe do 5 years, maybe 8 years in an electric car, that's because if you test them in a lab, that's not necessarily representative of a real world environment. Because if you're doing accelerated charging, discharging, constantly hammering these things in a way that they will not be used in most applications, that's not going to be representative of how they're going to be treated in the vehicle. It's not going to be necessarily representative of the ambient temperatures and the kind of driving conditions that they're going to be faced with. It was only once we actually got those batteries out there into the real world that we realized, hey, these are actually really resilient. So it's genuinely better than early lab tests indicated. The problem with battery recycling at the moment isn't that we can't recycle them, it's that there's not enough dead EV batteries to recycle. So everyone's sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting on this feedstock coming in.
Wow. And so really, we thought that we'd have them turning over by now, and we haven't. And that would explain some of the longer warranties that we're seeing, the 8-year battery warranty, as manufacturers are getting a bit more confident.
The obviously 8-year warranty, that is with manufacturers being really skittish and conservative because they don't want to have to pay out on that. What we're seeing now is some manufacturers switching to 10-year battery warranty. We're getting to the stage where batteries are outlasting expectations so much that even the kind of skittish warranty conditions are getting more generous. So there's even more confidence to buy an EV these days.
And degradation, which was the big fear, seems to not be something that we need to worry about.
It's a totally different beast to the battery that's in your smartphone or your laptop. Yes, they're lithium ion, but the chemistries are subtly different. The way they're made is different. The quality's arguably not as good. And also, they're deliberately pushing the voltages and the temperatures of cells in laptops and smartphones and so on to the extreme, all in the sake of a few minutes extra runtime, and also the fact they don't have any kind of thermal management, liquid thermal management system to wick away that heat. Compare it to the very easy life that they have in an electric vehicle, and then those eventually deemed dead electric vehicle batteries, which still have about 70% of their original capacity. So that's actually more than enough for most electric car drivers to keep driving that dead battery. You can then put those into second life applications like energy storage that are even easier on that battery, and then you'll get decades out of them before you eventually do recycle them.
Talk to me about that. First of all, I can't. You're making me laugh because I've never seen anyone quite so passionate about batteries, and I love that so much because it really helps us. Like your passion shines through, and it's really exciting. Then too, because
Stop it!
you
Go
really
on.
it makes sense.
Well, thank
talk to
you.
us about that, because that's also genuinely exciting. The life of a battery after it comes. Well, it's in the EV for longer than we thought. After it comes out of the EV, there are then options for it, right? Not just recycling.
Absolutely. Oh, no. There's already companies worldwide who are making second life electric vehicle energy storage systems. And one, for example, is Connected Energy in the UK. So what they do is they take old electric vehicle batteries from the likes of the Renault Kangoo electric vans from the early 2010s, not too dissimilar to early Nissans in terms of quality and so on. But they'll then stick those into shipping containers. And then they'll basically literally stack the packs on top of one another, hook them up to some control electronics, probably get an air conditioning unit in there to keep everything nice and optimized temperature-wise. And when you look at the the kind of charge-discharge patterns, the duty cycles of an electric vehicle, where you've got harsh acceleration, regenerative braking, kind of stop-start driving. The novelty of the instant torque of an electric vehicle means that inevitably one that's fairly new will be, kind of raced off the line quite a bit against taxi drivers and white vans and all that. So, genuinely, you do see it's a very kind of spiky graph.
I mean, we've been banging on about all of the great things, because it's really nice to have some good news. But there is a dark side to battery production in particular. The stories surrounding that and what to believe and what not to believe. And obviously the huge human cost of mining is one of those factors. But where are we headed with all of that?
The two minerals that are making the headlines are lithium and cobalt, and in both cases they're accused of having kids working down mines. First of all, the people, if you see anyone who says, oh, there's children working in lithium mines, they've not been reading the correct sources, because that's not the case. Lithium generally comes from either hard rock in the likes of Australia or brines from the likes of South America, but the UK actually has its own lithium reserves too, down old Cornish mines, both hard rock and geothermal brines. Cobalt, that's where the serious contention is, because it's about 70% of cobalt comes from Democratic Republic of Congo. Most of it is from open cast mines, from big mining giants like Glencore and so on, and they have to play by the rule book, and they have to make sure that there's this proper ESG, environmental and social governance in place. But because the wages in DRC are so low, like a teacher earns something like $2 a day. If you can do artisanal mining, in other words, dig your own hole and extract your own cobalt ore, then you can earn $3 a day. And when you've got a nation which doesn't have a welfare state, doesn't have free education, doesn't have free healthcare, funnily enough, there's quite a few people who do that. Artisanal mining is not restricted to cobalt. There's loads of artisanal mining worldwide for loads of different resources. But unfortunately, sometimes the working conditions are not very safe for these artisanal mines, because it's DIY efforts. And sometimes, such as the financial desperation of the household, you'll find children working there too. The good news, however, there's the technological good news, and then there's the sort of societal good news. So we'll start with the societal. The Fair Cobalt Alliance has been established to basically make sure that artisanal mining is safe, that wages are fair, that children are in schools, not in mines. And the likes of LG Chem, big battery manufacturer, and Tesla, needs no introduction, are members of that. Conspicuous in their absence are the oil and gas companies who use cobalt to refine petrol and diesel. There are basically the best-selling cars on worldwide roads, coming from Tesla, Chinese manufacturers. Ford's doing it with the Mustang Mach-E in the US. Volkswagen, Mercedes are going to follow suit. Basically, they're switching to these cobalt-free LFP batteries. So anyone who gets out of their V8 Range Rover and points at a Tesla Model 3 standard range driver or a Model Y standard range driver or a BYD driver and says, oh, there's kids that mind the cobalt in that battery as they're filling up their V8 Range Rover. Actually, there's no cobalt anywhere near that electric car. And by default, the V8 Range Rover is using more cobalt because that uses cobalt to refine the petrol and diesel that goes into it every time it gets filled up.
Myths busted. Thank you very much. That's really, really useful. And my other question is, obviously cobalt is now the demand is going to decrease, but for the other minerals, demand is not going to decrease. In fact, it's only going to increase as we make that shift to EV. How sustainable is that? How sustainable is the mining of that from an environmental point of view? And do we have enough?
So there's definitely areas where nations need to be far stronger on their ESG that I mentioned earlier. They need to be making sure that there's very strict practices in place for mines. There are clean ways of doing things and there are dirty ways of doing things. And if you see the colour of the likes of water runoff from Indonesia and nickel mines and things like that, these are things that are not insurmountable. But at the moment, they're not being tackled due to insufficient sort of governmental input to tackle this. These are, as I say, they're not insurmountable. We're already seeing ways of dealing with mining waste in a far more efficient manner, of being able to extract more resources from the same deposits, etc. So again, it's because of this powerful spotlight of scrutiny that's been put on electric vehicles that's not been put on petrol and diesel cars, it's not been put on consumer electronics, etc. That has actually helped the sector to vastly improve its environmental credentials, but there's still obviously some work to be done. That said, I mentioned nickel. Lithium iron phosphate does not contain nickel, and LFP looks as if it's going to become a mainstay of a wide range of manufacturers' electric vehicle batteries for ranges of upwards of 200 miles per charge. NMC gets you more range, but how much range do you actually need? And lithium iron phosphate's energy density is improving. In other words, how much range you can physically squeeze into a particular space. And then on top of that, we can move away from lithium as well. Sodium ion is tantalizingly close to commercialization. That removes not just your cobalt and your nickel. You're looking at sodium, you're looking at bio-derived negative electrode materials, you're looking at incredibly
Slow
cheap and
down.
abundant.
Wait. Yeah, now you've got too excited. Talk to me about
Yeah.
sodium ion.
So sodium ion is very similar to lithium ion, but you're replacing lithium, which, by the way, is a lot more abundant than people think it is. So it's not scarce. It's just that the supply chain needs to ramp up for it, and that's where the bottleneck is. But sodium, obviously, salt. We've been using that for quite some time, and it's even more abundant, and the supply chain's already there.
Yeah.
So sodium has some clever tricks up its sleeve. It may be a bigger atom, which means that in terms of the structure that would be used for the anode, the negative electrode of a lithium ion cell, if it tried to kind of pigeonhole itself in between those layers of graphene that make up the graphite, it's just carbon, but it basically smashes it apart and ruins it. So you need a less organized structure, hard carbon. Hard carbon can be easily made from waste biomass. So basically, any kind of wood chippings or what have you that would naturally have come from the forestry industry, you can effectively char. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but you can char it and turn it into this hard carbon, which works really well.
So we are literally talking about EVs powered by salt.
Pretty much, yeah. Yes, that's basically it. It's 1/2 a table salt with really, really cheap positive electrode materials as well. It's a very exciting avenue to go down.
It's really exciting. Look what happens when you speak to a battery specialist. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing A, your enthusiasm, and B, your knowledge today, because it's such a minefield of rumor and speculation and misunderstanding, and even down to the basics of how it actually works to power your car, the battery. Really appreciate your help today. Thank you.
No problem.